Heads up. Marketable security train continuing to chug along. Your eyes are not deceiving you. Approaching a quarter of all assets isn't just marketable securities. Definitely something I personally don't think is talked about enough in the investment communities of these large tech companies. But looking at just the bottom line of the assets, total assets has increased very noticeably. Most of that coming from property and equipment. There's now an additional over 20 billion in property and equipment. That's very noticeable. Similarly, liabilities increasing by a roughly similar percentage amount. I think it's very healthy to be reminded that the AI boom, the beginnings of any boom, look like very expensive new equipment. Income statement, revenue rushing forward, very healthy growth rates. And especially compared to last season, this season, Google has actually kept its sales and marketing pretty decent, meaning that income from operations is actually able to grow this year. Broken down to the earnings per share level, we can see that Google has corrected last year and is once again reaching earnings per share of brand new heights. Still not smooth by any stretch of the imagination. I would call Google definitely one of the most stable tech companies. I mean, again, it's certainly no Palantir. Statement of cash flows. Depreciation decreasing. And while it's not necessarily a change in trend or really meaningful, I need to stop and remind everyone that stock-based compensation at Google is now surpassed over 20 billion. 20 billion. 20 billion. Very much in line with what has always been the case at Google. The cash generated by operating activities has surpassed over 100 billion and has been this high for years. And so Google gushing money, giving a historically astronomical share of that to share-based compensation, then able to pump tens of billions of dollars into a property and equipment experiment. And so in conclusion for the opening move, I want us to look at the details of that new property and equipment, any information that is included about the strategy, about what it is, and about why it's not increasing the depreciation figure. We have scrolled in the notes to the item 8 until we found property and equipment. First paragraph is a somewhat generic but still very useful description of all the categories inside of it, things like servers, network equipment, buildings, land. And in the second paragraph, explaining the depreciation connection. We are looking at a very normal cost less accumulated depreciation. There is not a single technology asset that depreciates for longer than the buildings. In fact, they're going as far as to say that generally technology assets do live for 6 years. And then the section ends. Now our Control F for property and equipment, sus, takes us to the item 7, where in a section called capital expenditures and leases, we're getting a breakdown somewhat of what the capital investments are. And remember, item 7 is very much just talking about the current season. They call it technical infrastructure, servers and network equipment for computing, storage, and networking requirements. Now, possibly for the first time, although don't necessarily quote me on it, the justification for needing technical infrastructure now lists computing as the very first priority. That's AI boom. They even specifically call out AI just in the end of that sentence. And this is where we get into the details. The balance sheet showed an increase of 20 billion, but here they're explaining that the AI data centers are actually over 30 billion in investment, and that this has been going on for 2 years already, giving us the go-ahead to Control F for AI product. And this brings us higher up into the item 7. This very helpful paragraph. We are expanding our investment in AI across the entire company. The next several sentences, very googly, just name dropping. Google is usually one of the most ambitious companies out there, and that oozes throughout the item 7s. But here, maybe not surprising, but they've actually elected to devote this whole paragraph about AI products to taper expectations, calling this a category of business highly competitive, rapidly evolving, and requiring significant investment. That used to be talked about a lot more energetically. But they're acting like adults here because they explicitly say where this caution is coming from. Google cautioning everyone to say, this is not our core business, unambiguously. They're going to give it the good old college try. It's not until in the item 7A, the risk factors, that we finally get more color about why the caution is coming. First, let's read this sentence. Our development, use, commercialization of AI could subject us to regulatory action and legal liability. Google, already fighting off legal battles and government regulation for well over a decade, is not the first time that new business has had to be balanced with not drawing too much attention to the company. But this really is the first time that Google doesn't seem to have a defense prepared for how AI products don't encroach on data protection and security. The AI boom is finally that promise that people have talked about for decades of if you get all the data in the world together, you can do special things. It is very invasive to privacy and very insecure. The company then is seeing AI products as potential growth, tapered in, mixed in, inseparable from legal liability. Now, scrolling up, this sentence was within a risk section called we are subject to yada yada yada, and we will likely be subject to an even broader scope of laws and regulations as we continue to expand. If you're a tech startup, just YOLO it. But if you're generating hundreds of billions of dollars annually, over and over and over and over again, that comes with a target on your back. There are entire continents worth of countries that don't even make $100 billion in tax revenue. And you can bet that those politicians certainly have the time to hate on Google at every opportunity. Haters gonna hate, yes. But if those haters have a government badge ID, you kind of have to pay attention to it. A bit more low-key, but you know I'm going to read every risk factor for you guys, is this one right here. Ongoing investments in safety, security, and content review will likely identify abuse of our platforms and misuse of user data. A very techie way of saying 10 years ago, no one cared if we doubled the amount of time you spent on Google. No one talked about bots. No one talked about hackers. No one talked about the reality of the internet. Compare this all the way back to the very first cities. Everyone wanted to move to the city, and so they sold everything, sold their farmhouse, mortgaged out their prize dairy cows in order to get their family a cramped up apartment on 30th Avenue. It was only then that they realized that the cities didn't talk about the crime, didn't talk about the filth, didn't talk about the constant privacy invasion, and we have learned to live with it. I mean, and frankly, it's gotten better with time. But the internet is not immune to human nature. Wherever humans congregate, even if it is digitally, it's not as simple as more click, good, more screen time, good. Google is arguably a digital empire that for the first time is asking, hey, what about the bad things going on? And so a lot of effort alongside the effort being put into the fun AI future, there also needs to be a lot of effort in some of the things they're mentioning here: preventing cyber attacks, limiting data or metering it, visibility over services, spam, scraping, disinformation, schema enforcement practices that do get buggy once you reach the scale that Google is at, incident resolution, consistency in policy enforcement. And while the list could potentially go on and on because I haven't even mentioned third parties, I'll fast forward to what they say. There is no guarantee that these issues will not ultimately result in significant legal, financial, and/or reputational harm. I think we all intuitively know that mo money, mo problems. But in the 21st century, that could easily be updated to mo data, mo dilemmas. Some of my favorite companies actually, as an investor, and y'all know I like to make that money, are extremely responsible, socially responsible. I mean, just take a look at Coca-Cola's last season annual report. I could name you several others. Always going left when others are going right. Google refusing to conform. They're not going to ignore AI, but it's not priority number one. And I gotta say, I'm a little proud. Let's see. Okay, so Google is undeniably profitable. So it's got to get a good ranking. Everything was growing, so it's going to be over 50%. But these financial risks, specifically around the regulatory front, are too material. So I don't think this is going to be a pristine ranking. I don't think it's going to be at the top of the list. I'm going to get quite narrow here and say Google is between the 40th and 50th percentile. What do you think? Sage Seeds AI is going to give us a ranking. The Sage Seeds AI is trained to identify value investment opportunities. Tell your friends about it, get them to guess as well, and whichever one of you gets closer is clearly destined to become a financial sage. Alphabet Inc. is ranked in the 46th percentile in value for the 2023